Hello, my name is Kelsey Bloss and my presentation is going to be on the ivory trade. So first, what is the ivory trade? It is the legal as well as the illegal buying and selling of ivory, which is usually obtained from elephants but can also be found from walrus, mammoth, hippos, and narwhals. The history of the ivory trade. So ivory was originally used by African tribes and African civilizations for things like art and religion. So it was used for things like jewelry and religious figurines. And then the ivory trade finally started happening outside of Africa, and that is when people started realizing they could make profit with this. And so then it eventually made its way to Europe, and Europeans went crazy for it. They wanted to use it for art and money and trophies. And so the Europeans actually started hunting the elephants specifically for their tusks to use as trophies. And America and Europe were using ivory for things like piano keys and billiard balls and mass production. And the elephant population, of course, through this took a very rapid and steep decline, causing a lot of problems because too many elephants were being killed for their ivory. So there are many uses of the ivory obtained from the elephants, such as jewelry, piano keys, figurines. This here is just a tusk that has been carved into, so it's a trophy tusk, as well as things like art and religious figurines. And of course, because of this, the elephant population declined very quickly, as said before. And as you can see here, in 1930, there were 5 million elephants. And by 1979, it was estimated that there were 1,300,000 elephants remaining. And currently, there's an estimate of about 600,000 elephants remaining. And it is still decreasing due to things like poaching. And this brings us to CITES and the ban on ivory. And so CITES is the Convention. CITES is the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, and their job is to look at individual species and sort them into one of 3 appendices. And so Appendix 1 is for the most endangered animals that need strict regulations and usually a ban in all trade. Appendix 2 is very endangered animals that are at the point where they just need to be watched, maybe some slight regulations, but then there's Appendix 3, and that is animals that are not in critical danger and just need to be watched to make sure nothing changes over time. And so in 1977, they had a meeting and they moved the they moved African elephants to Appendix 2 based on the decreased population size, as well as their tusks being used so much for trade and for these figurines and such. And in 1990, just a little over a decade later, there was a meeting where they moved African elephants to Appendix 1 and put a ban on the ivory trade. However, of course, there were exceptions, such as any ivory that could be proven to be obtained before 1970 was considered legal for international trade. And then there were 2 times where they allowed the sale of a country's stockpiles. And all these exceptions did allow for illegally obtained ivory to be sold off as legal. And that caused a lot of problems, creating the illegal ivory trade. And then there's the environmental impacts of the ivory trade. As so many elephants are dying, they are changing their environment. So there are these pathways that elephants usually take for their migration. And each herd takes a different pathway. And so they're role is that they spread these seeds, because as they eat the plants, they digest everything, but the seed comes out okay, and so they've spread it now to a farther place, as well as they dig watering holes that other animals can then use. And so with the expansion of cities and roads and infrastructure by humans, they are causing there to be fewer of these elephant highways, and causing many problems with things like plant growth, and there's going to be overgrazing due to having fewer places to eat, and that is going to cause problems with soil as well as a loss of plant life. The human impacts, one that's not commonly thought of, is actually the human death toll involved with the illegal ivory trade. And that is due to the illegal ivory trade being a funding for a lot of crime, including corrupt governments, terrorist groups, crime syndicates. And so that is causing actually a pretty large human death toll associated with the ivory trade. And that does actually include slavery and slaves dying from being overworked. And then, of course, there are economic impacts, especially after the ban. Since the illegal ivory trade has the black market, which is very lucrative, there is a huge profit margin as supply is decreased due to the ban. And demand is still high in certain countries, especially like China and Japan. And so if you can get illegally traded or illegally obtained ivory to these countries, there is a huge profit. And that is causing a lot of problems with poaching, but also with the slavery and the crime. And so conservation efforts. There are actually plenty of groups that spend their time, money, and energy trying to save the elephants and trying to stop poaching. And so there is CITES with their bans and their regulations. There is the public campaigns that at least one has been seen by everyone in developed countries. They alert the public of the problems with the ivory trade and the elephants. And there's the World Wildlife Fund, the International Elephant Foundation, elephant and wildlife reserves and parks, and with those, the park rangers that try really hard to stop poaching in those specific areas, but also around them. And finally, is there hope? The short answer is yes, there is hope. The elephant populations have not declined so much that they cannot be restored. However, it will take a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of money, immense cooperation, and it could potentially harm some economies that do rely a little bit on ivory trade, whether legal or not. So the long answer is that it would take strict rules and regulations and a lot of money and time, and it is complicated, so it is possible that the elephant population will go extinct within our lifetime, but there is still hope. And here are my sources. Thank you for watching my presentation.